Well, welcome everyone to this series of webinar forums that have been developed by the Australian Compassion Council. These forums provide us the opportunity to share our thoughts on compassion in a time of pandemic. We are in extraordinary times, and compassion certainly has a pivotal role to play in envisaging a better future for our Earth and every person on that planet. My name is Lynne Reeder, and I'm from the Australian Compassion Council, and other members of that council include Terry Ayling, Dr. Debbie Ling, Mark Crosweller, Louise Murphy, and Dr. Sue Somskis, and our National Indigenous Advisor, Al Harris. So, before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wadawurrung lands on the Indigenous lands on which we meet. I am on Wadawurrung lands, so I will pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I invite you now all to take a compassionate pause to reflect on the Indigenous lands on which you are meeting, on which you are situated. We welcome you all to these forums, which are exploring compassion across a range of areas. And this week we are engaging in the inspiring potential of music with the wonderful Lior. I'll be in conversation with Lior, and you are invited to type your questions so that I can ask them following our conversations, just in the webinar chat space there. Lior is one of Australia's most well-loved singer-songwriters, perhaps best known for his album Autumn Flow, and in the context of compassion, perhaps best known for the song cycle Compassion. In 2013, Lior teamed up with the composer Nigel Westlake to create Compassion, a symphony of song based on ancient Hebrew texts. In commenting on their collaboration, Nigel Westlake says, "The Compassion Symphony drew upon the myriad of influences that Lior and I were both able to bring to the table from our incredibly diverse backgrounds. We sought to imbue the ancient texts with a contemporary interpretation, adhering to the purity of the single voice and orchestra." And Lior certainly has that purity of voice. So welcome, Lior. As Nigel suggests in that statement, music is a crucial part of all our cultures, connecting us to others, often across those divides. So I'm just wondering what you've been noticing about how music is supporting people during this time of pandemic.
Well, hi, Lynne. Thanks so much for having me on. It's lovely to talk to you again. Yes, it has been a strange time, and I think for me, one of the things that this period has highlighted is we often talk about the incredible power of music in connecting us and being a universal language. But I guess now that in a sense has been taken away, or at least in the physical form, to me, it's been a real reminder of the solace found in music on a personal level, on an introspective level, and both personally and also seeing with my kids as well, who are finding the time and I suppose the need for that beautiful escapism that music can provide. So spending more time with their instruments, being drawn to your instrument and having that time for reflection. And I think in its core, that's what drew me to music when I was growing up, is having a safe and beautiful place to escape.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's that solace, isn't it? And that sanctuary that can be provided, by the sound. It's sort of that reverberation within our bodies that can calm us down.
Yeah, well, playing music as well, but I mean, listening to music is an incredible thing, and we could spend a whole different session talking about that. But listening to music is such a powerful thing because it's a very unique process. It actually engages our brain in such an active way. Our ability to process music is truly remarkable when you actually sort of delve into the science of it. But you know, on the other hand, it also has this incredible calming and meditative aspect as well. So I think that sort of dual way how music affects us is quite remarkable.
Mm. Yeah, and Lior, you've been a great supporter of the Charter for Compassion, and in turn, both the Charter globally and in Australia have strongly connected with the Compassion Symphony. So I was really interested to learn more about the story of the song cycle and perhaps how it was created. And also I know that you've played it in many different places across the world, so a little bit about where it's been played as well.
Yeah, sure. The way the Compassion song cycle, symphonic song cycle came about, it sort of came about in rather profound circumstances. You mentioned that it's a collaboration with Nigel Westlake, who for some people watching may not know. Nigel is one of Australia's most celebrated and renowned composers who, alongside many classical compositions, has also written the score for several Hollywood films and is a remarkable composer. It was about 8 years ago. I of course knew of Nigel, but didn't know Nigel personally. And I received a phone call from a mutual friend of Nigel and mine, who we didn't know at the time. And he was calling me from a sailing trip, actually, to mark Nigel's 50th birthday. And he said, oh, I'm here. Do you know Nigel Westlake? I said, well, I know of him, but I don't know him personally. He said, well, your song has just come on. I'm here with him. And your song has just come on, and we started chatting. And the sailing trip was while it was marking Nigel's 50th birthday. It was actually significant because of much more tragic circumstances. Nigel's son was tragically murdered a year before that, and Nigel, as you can imagine, was in a state of deep grief. And as for his 50th birthday, he invited a few friends, and they took a sailing trip, and he stopped at several places which were significant in the family to lay, you know, symbols of commemoration to his son. And as the conversation went on, I learned that my album, Autumn Flow, that you referred to, was a special album that his son had brought to the family and had become an important album for the family. And our friend Ruben got talking, and he said, you know, Nigel was and his wife Jan are planning a 1-year memorial for his son, a concert, and was wondering whether you would be interested in performing. And so I was very touched, as you can imagine, and flattered by the request. And a short while later, I headed to this small rural town an hour outside of Sydney, where Nigel and Jan had organised for their friends and family, and it was quite a large gathering to attend a concert. And as you can imagine, with Nigel standing, you know, there were some pretty heavyweight musicians there. You know, several musicians from the Sydney Symphony, and you know, the Gregorian brothers, who are two of the most you know, established classical guitarists in the world, were there, and we performed, and I also had the chance to perform about half an hour's worth of my songs, which I performed with a string quartet. And it was a very emotional concert, as you can imagine. And at the end, I decided to finish on an ancient Hebrew hymn called Avinu Malkeinu. Now, I had been performing a lot during that time, and this hymn I grew up listening to and being sort of enchanted by the melody of it. But later on in life, when I started looking into the meaning of this hymn, which is called Avinu Malkeinu, I was taken by a beautiful message that was instilled within it. And it roughly translates to instill me with a sense of compassion so that I can be liberated. And I was really taken by this message of being freed through a greater sense of compassion, of compassion being, you know, a road to a greater sense of freedom or liberation. And I started performing this hymn purely a cappella, and found that it had, you know, quite a strong resonance with people, even though they didn't understand what I was singing. So I chose to end my performance that night with this hymn, and I thought I'd just sing a little bit of it to give listeners an indication of
Yeah, beautiful, Lior. That's
of the
lovely.
style. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Chaneinu ve'aneinu, ki ein banu masi. Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Chaneinu ve'aneinu, ki ein banu masi. Aseh imanu tzedaka v'chesed. Aseh imanu tzedaka v'chesed v'hoshienu. Avinu Malkeinu. So that's an abridged version of the hymn that I sang that night.
Yeah,
and it had there was a really strong feeling in the room, a resonant one is the way I can describe it. And after the concert, I met Nigel for the first time, really, and we were talking, and we just jamming about how we could collaborate musically. And we said, "Oh, imagine we worked together on drawing an epic orchestration to that hymn." I'd only ever performed that hymn in an a cappella manner, and that's how the musical collaboration was born. And so we then to and froed and worked together on a 7-minute orchestration to that hymn that I just sang. And really our vision was to present it to the Sydney Symphony, that they would consider maybe performing it in some sort of series of short works, or, we only ever saw it as a little piece. And so we recorded a demo of that 7-minute work and presented it to the Sydney Symphony. And the artistic director, Peter Chorney, at the time came back to us and asked if we would like to meet and discuss it. And we did. And in the meeting, he said, "Look, we think this is great, and we'd love to actually commission you guys to work on a full-length symphony." Sure. So Nigel and I sort of looked at each other, and we didn't expect that, and we were thrilled. But after the meeting, we sort of looked at each other and went, "What are we going to do? We've got 7 minutes. How are we going to do a 45-minute work?" And so hence the process began of thinking about what we wanted to present. And for me, the power of that hymn that I just sang is the way it uses an ancient text to present a universal and humanitarian concept. And there's that sort of link with the ancient, with the sacred, but of something that's universal. It's not, and I didn't want to present something that would be deemed as culturally specific or adhering to a particular religious stream. And so I felt that simply gathering other ancient Hebrew texts would do that. And I thought, well, how am I going to do that? And I thought that perhaps I could find a similar hymn or proverb in Arabic from the ancient world of Islam that says the same thing and present a sort of dual common message from two worlds that have had such a tumultuous history over time and still do. And so just to go back on the way you presented Compassion, it actually consists of ancient Hebrew and Arabic texts and proverbs. And so we went about. I enlisted the help of a friend to guide me to similar proverbs, and I found a text that said very much a similar thing. It spoke about compassion as the road to liberation, and we started working on this sort of this second piece to sort of counter the first, and that was the beginning, and that's how Compassion grew to consist of 7 movements of both in ancient Hebrew and in ancient Arabic, which express the common wisdom of compassion. And we were lucky enough to premiere that in September 2013 with the Sydney Symphony, and went on to perform that with all the major symphonies in Australia. And also I was lucky enough to come and perform it in Austin with the Austin Symphony Orchestra in the US, twice actually, in 2015 and just last year as well. And just recently also in Christchurch in New Zealand as part of the 1-year memorial for the tragic killings there that took place in the mosque just over 1 year ago. So look, we performed it several times, and it still amazes me how much people connect to this work, given most people don't understand the words, but there's a feeling that it taps into a certain sacredness or spirituality that I think people can connect with, and through it feel the just that common wisdom, as I said, and the poignant and profound nature of compassion, which is, transmitted through the music.
Mm. Yeah, that's right. And it must have been amazing to be in New Zealand and be able to, as you say, that it's resonating with people in very different ways, and for the New Zealand government to reach out and invite you to play that, I think really speaks to that cross-cultural and interreligious, and that it's common humanity. We talk about our common humanity, and I think that's what this has been able to connect with. And so I just wanting just to ask about that experience in New Zealand, to get a little bit more understanding of how that, of what that was like for you, and the responses.
Well, it was obviously a great honour to have been invited there. It happened to fall right on the cusp of when the restrictions were being brought in. So it was a strange time. The concert, I think, was due in March, was performed in March 12 in Christchurch, and the restrictions and borders started closing on March 13. So we just snuck it in. It was due to be part of a much bigger commemorative gathering, which was cancelled in the last minute. It fell in a bit of an unfortunate time. The concert fortunately went ahead. I think half of the crowd turned up and half didn't. So it was all very shaky and last minute. But through having conversations with some of the audience members, as well as the orchestral musicians who knew people who died, there was still a lot of healing to be done. And I think from the feedback I got, this played a small part in the healing. I guess it is still very much a place that's in a lot of grief and pain. And what you were saying before about the healing power of music is it really is just so real and so important.
Yeah, and in fact, the Compassion Symphony actually affirms, in its words and senses that it touches, that attaining a greater sense of compassion and letting that sense of compassion guide our actions is the ultimate wisdom. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about compassion and wisdom in that sense.
Yeah, look, compassion, I see it as the most important of human traits. I see it as the trait that really defines us as human beings, our unique ability to use our imagination, to employ, I guess a reality of what it would be like to be someone else, to be in someone else's predicament, and to use that to act in a kinder way. There's a beautiful quote actually from the album that I was just, in preparation for this, going back over the Proverbs and reading it. This is the album, by the way, which was recorded with the Sydney Symphony. Excuse the shameless promotion, but there's a beautiful quote, which is one of the ancient Arabic texts, which is, compassion does not enter into anything without beautifying it, and is not removed from anything without making it ugly. So that's a beautiful way of expressing that, you know, compassion is the seed of beauty in human existence. And I think, you know, I've had the pleasure of talking about compassion in I suppose a more pragmatic or practical setting with you, Lynne. You know, I know you've done a lot of work with compassion in policy making, and, you know, how do we apply this vital human trait in decision making? And I think that's where, to me, compassion is. The idea of compassion is really interesting in using compassion as a platform upon which to make decisions. And sometimes difficult decisions need to be made. And compassion, you know, doesn't mean, you know, laying over and letting anyone walk all over you. But I think that if we begin our decision making with coming from a compassionate place, then it's going to, at the end of the day, I think it will lead us to making better decisions, both as individuals and as a society.
Yes, yes. I think we talk about in policy making compassion as a motivation. And we know that our motivations organise our feelings, thoughts and actions, and that a motivation of compassion will organise our thoughts, feelings and emotions in very different ways from, say, a motivation of revenge. So understanding how our motivations guide our behaviours and actions is the first, you know, is a starting point for understanding how the motivation compassion supports our own and others' well-being. I've just asked Lior now last question, but if anyone else wants to have any questions, if you've got any questions that you would like to ask Lior, there's the Zoom webinar chat space there. You can just type your questions in. So Lior, I'm asking each of our speakers, what has been the enduring image they have personally witnessed during the time of physical distancing? You know, as a performer who is unable to perform, what is that image? What do you think that image you'll take away from this time with you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've gone to great lengths to actually document the you know, how it's affected my family. I've got 2 kids, and, you know, and with my wife, and just the sort of things that we do as a family, which we otherwise wouldn't do. So my enduring image is on a Friday night, my daughter and my wife tap into a dance workshop, and they you know, proceed to learn a choreographed dance in front of the computer screen every Friday. So I've got videos of that, and that's just something that would never happen otherwise, you know. So yeah, there's been beautiful moments like that where it's been a really bonding time, you know. I guess with these things, you know, speaking to a lot of friends and a lot of artists, you know, you have to look for the silver linings, and it's facilitated some beautiful family time. Unfortunate that it took a global tragedy to do that, but silver linings, yeah.
Yes, yes, yeah. I can see Terry Ailing is asking about this week is National Palliative Care Week, and so he's referring to the healing qualities of music therapy and the role they play in hospitals and aged care settings. You know, at the end of life, music plays a profound role in opening dying people to the journey ahead. So the question is, in what ways can we use sacred music in an increasing secular society to open people up to life's deepest questions and openings?
Yeah, that's a great point, isn't it? And I think that's, for me, that's what the most powerful imprint of performing compassion has been, is to see the way that music has just opened people up. You know, it's it doesn't give you the answers, but it opens you up to be more open-minded, to ask questions and explore answers. So it's a really great question, isn't it? You know, I've heard of situations where in certain countries where before there's a cabinet meeting or an important meeting of leaders or politicians, they actually sit down and listen to a piece of music. And I think that's really, you know, it sounds so simple, but how many, I wonder, you know, how many times that's employed. And I think that's a really powerful way, is just to actually change the cellular nature of, because it's proven that music has a cellular effect on us. So, you know, shake things up before we actually sit down and need to communicate in, you know, perhaps more, you know, practical terms.
And I think too, the point about, you know, using sacred music in a secular society, to me, people don't really, you know, it's that sort of generality, not generality, but it's the holistic nature of music, where it can't be put into, you know, spaces and, you know, just headings like sacred music. And do you think, or is that, you know, do you think it's all music, or do you think there is sacred music and that's got implications for secular culture?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, music that might be sacred to one person may not feel sacred to another person. And, you know, that certainly was the topic of many conversations between Nigel and I in creating Compassion, is that we didn't want to be overly culturally specific in terms of referencing. So while we were presenting ancient Arabic texts, we purposefully didn't go towards perhaps the oud or a traditional Arabic instrument, because we wanted it to sort of, as much as possible, exist in a sort of more open-ended setting. So yeah, look, I don't know. I mean, within Compassion, I use, you know, I use minor scales a lot, and there's certain vocal inflections and trills that are sort of have an Eastern kind of, you know, overtone to it, and that's fused with a Western orchestration of a symphony orchestra as well. So perhaps it's the bringing together of those worlds as well, and just in a way which transmits overtones rather than, as I said, being culturally specific. So it's a fine balancing act of sort of presenting sparks and catalysts, but not, you know, being too specific, letting people kind of create their own narrative to an extent.
Yes, yeah. Oh, good. So and I can see also that there's a thank you for all the help, Lior, that you've given so selflessly to the Charter for Compassion. So thank you so much. Yeah, it's been wonderful. And yeah, so did you, could we hear a little bit more music before we finish, or would you rather? I know that you say that Zoom is not a good space for the quality of sound, but are you happy to do that or not?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having me on and giving me a chance to talk about Compassion. These are really wonderful forums which I've enjoyed. I thought I'd leave you with a song for as much as I can, you know, present in this restricted format musically. But I'll just grab the guitar. This is more in my world of being a singer-songwriter, but I know that there was a question about palliative care, and perhaps somehow relevant, because this is a song I wrote about my grandfather, who was a huge influence on my life. So somewhat fitting.
Gorgeous.
I'll just adjust.
Yeah, sure.
When I was born, my grandfather held me in his warm hands, and it seems though his eyes are teary, but it's hard to tell from the old photograph. While my brother and sister danced at the feet of his tired and weathered frame, he said, "There's a light to this boy I've rarely seen, and there he gave me my name. Well, my grandfather was a sniper in the Red Army. He never knew any brothers in arms, for on both sides stood enemies. With a cold, unbroken will to survive, his steady hand took aim, and he drank just enough to keep himself warm, for he never spoke his true name. When I was a boy, the summers were ours. He would take me down to the sea. He'd stand on the water's edge and watch me go crazy as the gentle waves rolled in. Looking back, I wonder how he must have felt, watching me running so free. All the years in his life he wished he could forget. Did he look at the world through me? When I was a man, I flew across the ocean. When I heard he needed care, I listened as he spoke of his turbulent life from his ordinary chair. And he ended by saying, oh, I've had enough. The time's come for me to go. I have only one wish that is left in me, to be taken peacefully. Just before I was due to marry, I heard he could not walk anymore. It was then he gave up fight. I had said goodbye almost 1 year before. And I'll never forget something he told me. Yes, it's a cruel world, but you must live without fear. Well, I sure do miss my grandfather. He's the reason why I'm here.
Thank you, Lior. It's one of my favourite songs of yours. I just love it. And that was just beautiful. It came across really well. Thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. And I have to say, we've all been thinking of the artists and musicians that have been so deeply impacted by having their livelihoods taken away pretty much overnight. And I just say to people, if you want to find out when Lior might be touring again, hopefully towards the end of this year, I'd encourage you to visit his webpage, which is lior.com.au. And next week, I'll be in conversation with Louise Teggett, the director of the Ballarat Art Gallery. So that gallery was built in the 1800s and is one of the oldest purpose-built galleries in Australia. Louise will speak about the changing role art galleries play in creating social cohesion within their communities and how works of art can be tools of compassion. Thank you again, Lior. We're just so appreciative. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lynne. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Bye now. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.